Brought to you from the state of Connecticut, capital city of Hartford, this is a Department of Developmental Services production. Today's presentation, a conversation with Kevin Lembo.
We are so very pleased to have Kevin Lembo here with us today. Thank you for joining us, Kevin. Not only is Kevin our state controller, but he is also a dad. And actually, I've known him in that capacity far, far longer than I've known him as one of our Constitution officers. Recently, Kevin spoke at our Autism Awareness Day, and in his remarks pointed out the importance of families building networks of support through their extended family members and partners with the larger community. At DDS, we've been focusing on the same concept, building community. For many decades, the Department of Developmental Services has been seen as the only resource for persons with intellectual disability and their families. Today, we can include persons on the autism spectrum in that thought as well. The fact is, DDS can never be the end-all, be-all for these two populations. We are recasting ourselves, therefore, to be a much larger collaborator with our many partners throughout the state. The strength of our future services lies in how strongly we build those partnerships and help families to create their own networks of support. About a year ago, Connecticut DDS was awarded a unique opportunity to build a stronger base of family supports when we were awarded a national 4-year grant called the Community of Practice. Today, 250 people from throughout the state are engaged in this project. We are one of 5 states in the country to be recognized with this award. We are committed to work with our 4 peer states and help create a new vision of how to use state resources to leverage the expansion of community-based supports. We welcome the inclusion of any and all who would want to be part of this creative effort. It is certainly a different way of looking at supporting people with an array of challenges and exceptional abilities. It is at the same time a necessary innovation if we are to begin to meet the demands of supports that is here today and certainly on growing exponentially on the horizon. Now I'd like to introduce Jennifer Bogan, who's the director of our Autism Division.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you again. I echo the Commissioner's comments that we are so happy to have you here today.
I'm happy to be here, Jen. Thanks.
So I guess to get us started, we'd really just like to hear your story. If you could tell us about how it was raising 2 boys on the spectrum and how you got to where you are today.
Well, it was not a linear path, but in many ways, because it wasn't a straight line, it was probably the most life-giving and life-affirming journey up to now that we've experienced. So we adopted our sons when they were 3 and 6, and they were in foster care in the state of New York. And we were living in New York at the time. It was 1990, and they came to live with us. So we jumped through some hoops, and they came with piles of IEPs and evaluations, and they both came with a diagnosis that wasn't very comforting, and that was PDD-NOS, developmental disability, pervasive, not otherwise specified. So there wasn't a lot to hang on to. So we went down the path of having them see a new set of specialists and people who worked with kids on the spectrum. And then got to diagnoses that I think are more accurate for them. And then engaged the community and started calling around and seeing what services were available for them. And so the younger of the 2 went into a birth to 3 program pretty quickly. And the older was transitioning from kindergarten to 1st grade, and so went into a school building with supports. And when I look at their path, I see that the younger who had, I like to say, was hit heavy with services early, birth to 3, really intense. It made a real difference for him early on, that he was able to sort of get hold of some of the challenges that he was facing and to build a plan around him that made sense for him, and then target his educational path accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
So. And then fast forward, today they're 29 and 26, and we can go year by year, but I'm sure we don't have enough time. But they are both living independently today, both working, and supporting themselves, and I serve more in a resource role now. So every couple of weeks I'll get a call, and it'll be something like, well, the mortgage company is saying this, what does that mean? So really specific questions and really appropriate. Because most of us have had to reach out to someone to ask those questions the first time as well.
Sure.
So the questions now for us are they socially connected? Is there job support if we're not able to be there to help them decode something their supervisor is saying? What happens when we're no longer here to serve in that resource role? Who will do that for them? But it's an amazing journey. It's made me look at myself differently and how I interact with the world.
Sure.
And hopefully we've rubbed off on them in a positive way, but we have taught each other, I think, a lot along the way.
That's great. So lots of successes, lots of challenges along the way.
Yeah, indeed.
So if you were to put yourself back into that role when you started, when the boys first came to you, and you mentioned that the early intervention was really key for the younger of your two boys,
Sure.
What would you tell a family that was about to embark on this journey?
A couple of things. One is you are definitely not alone. So reach out, make the calls, figure out what is the local organization that serves your community nonprofit. What does the state have to offer? Really get a full list of services and supports that are available, not only for the child but for you as well. So that you can figure out what other parents you can come in contact with and ask them to help you understand better what's happening. And then I think understand that life has changed in many ways for you, either by choice or by biology or by something else. Life has changed, and there's nothing you can do about that except figure out who you're going to be in this new life. And I would argue that the primary role at that point is parent advocate. You are there to advocate. You're never going to be a specialist in autism spectrum. You're never going to be, you may be, but it is unlikely that you will be, clinically an expert. But you'll be an expert in your kid. And teachers will have things to say, and they'll have observations, and so will other clinicians that are in their life. But you're the primary advocate for that child. And sometimes you got to sharpen your elbows a little bit. And sometimes you need to sort of pull back and understand that more often than not, everyone has the child's best interest at heart. It doesn't mean that we're not going to disagree from time to time about the best path forward. And so weighing all that in the balance and continue to push. If you feel that there's something that is appropriate for your child and they need it now, if you don't push for it, it's likely not going to happen.
Right. One of the things that we see in parents across the state is that they're feeling like those transition periods, those key transition periods in a child's life are so difficult. And one of the things that a lot of parents talk about is them sort of falling off this cliff when they enter into adult services. Both your boys seem to be very successful, doing very well. What kinds of services did you put in place for them during that critical time specifically? And what do you attribute their success to?
So first I'll just say that, if you've met someone on the autism spectrum, you've met a person on the autism spectrum, right? So it's a little hard to sort of say that our path is going to be similar. It may be similar, but it's not going to be exactly the same as someone else's. And even child to child. So when I watched the two boys and as they developed, it was clear that they needed very different things. So the older of the two finished up high school in district. But it was clear he wasn't ready to launch at that point. He needed something beyond that up until age 21. And so he went off to Chapel Haven in New Haven and got a taste for what it was to have some supportive employment, to learn what it was like to be in a workplace and how to navigate that whole thing, how to navigate a living life, sort of cooking your dinner and making sure that you keep your place tidy and all those things that are also necessary. I think we taught them some of that as well, but it wasn't until he got out in the field and we field tested this particular child that we saw what we had done right, what we had done wrong, and what other supports he needed. And he very quickly sort of acknowledged the areas that were working, and then others. I remember him calling early on and saying, "We're doing cooking." He said, "We've spent a half hour on washing your hands. I'm going to lose my mind." Because that was this child, right? But he was in a very diverse group of kids, and they were all needed to be up on the same page. The younger of the two finished high school as well and was ready to go on to the next thing. But for him, it was more academic. So we had to spend a ton of time looking at colleges that had good supports for kids on the spectrum. And it made me a little sad at that time to learn that I had to actually send him out of state because the best public college I could find with the best supports was in Vermont, not in Connecticut.
Really?
Though Connecticut was exporting know-how and training other places about how to do this, but we weren't doing it ourselves at the time.
Right.
Now that's changed,
Right.
and it's much better now. But he went off to Johnson State in Vermont and did a 4-year degree. And they had a great program. You know, they began with heavy, intensive services, and then they tapered down as the years went on. And so he finished up and had a very high GPA, and did very well. But that was sort of what he needed. So that analysis was more about, and some of the other parents would laugh, but I'm a data guy, right? So it was all about the numbers for me. You know, spreadsheets, weighted averages, what was important to us, what wasn't. And so we scored the colleges, and he ended up in Vermont, and it was a very successful experience for him by and large. So it was, you know, it was not unlike what we did when they were 5, 6, and 7, developing an IEP. It was just we were doing a launch sequence, you know, for their immersion into adulthood, and trying to figure out what supports they needed, and then trying to find the balance between being heavy-handed and giving them what they needed. So enough support, they felt supported and independent, but not so much that they felt controlled. And then allowing them to fail was really hard. Sort of once you've gone through it, and I'm saying failed in a sort of a safe space, not something that was going to bring physical harm.
Sure.
But you've done everything you can do. You've taught the lessons. The supports are there. They need to ask for them when they need them. At that point, they're adults. And then watching them sort of heading towards something that was not going to go well, and then letting it happen, because it was a great opportunity to teach that life lesson in a controlled way. So, you know, it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
How did you know what supports they needed? I mean, one of the things that I hear from families all the time is they don't walk in with an instruction booklet. I
There's
don't know
no manual.
Right. I don't know if you've heard this story, Welcome to Holland. And basically it's parents of children with disabilities, and they feel like they were planning a trip, I think it was to France or something like that, and they learned French, and they read up, and they had places to stay, and they got off the plane, and they were in Holland. They were in a totally different country than where they were expecting, and a lot of parents connect with that story. So how did you know? No one, I'm assuming, said, here are these 2 children, and here's everything you're going to need to know for the rest of their life about what services they need.
No.
So how did you know what services they
Well,
need?
I think we did have the value of those early workups that came to us, frankly, before they did. And we did our best to find clinicians either through the schools or through friends of friends of friends, and literally broke up the manual or the documents that were there and said, okay, you're in social work, you read this, you know, and tried to sort of get people's ideas about what they were looking at on paper. But then the kid arrives.
Right.
And the kid is always different than what's on the
Than
paper,
what's on
right?
paper,
They
absolutely.
fit neatly into boxes in the report, but when you actually meet them, you realize. So I think it's a combination of trusting the clinicians that we've been with over the years and their observations about them outside the home environment, and our observations and knowledge of our child and what we thought would be the right set of supports for them. Now I'm sort of struggling to sort of pull down a concrete example of that. But you know, some of it is like, so for our older one, for example, is very rigid, and by his own acknowledgement, very rigid. So change is something that comes really hard for him. So that's something as simple potentially as a change in the work that he's doing at work and how to get that sort of going in the right direction, or something like changing a bank or adding a savings account, or so. But for us, it was clear that you need to do the pre. Right? Talk a little bit about it in general terms. You have to acknowledge that it might be good for some people a week later. And you might make another. So we needed to ramp him up if we were going to do any change. The other one's a little lighter on his feet, but he's the one who'll sort of perseverate about stuff. He'll sort of appear fine, but then he'll be back sort of like, because there was a hurt there and it's, not fixed and he needs to sort of work on it. So, again, trusting clinicians is important. That's not to say that every clinician you're going to meet is the right clinician for your family and your child, but with experience, you have to trust some of that, especially if it's your first time to the fair or to Holland.
Or to Holland, yeah, exactly. So, two-part question now. What do you see as the biggest barriers or challenges for families that families face in Connecticut and nationally with their children on the spectrum? And what do you think we can do about it?
Well, I think I'll start with the second part, and that is it's always resources, right? Sure. And at a time where resources are scarce and there's so much competition for them, it creates a real challenge trying to get things out there. But as Terry, as you said in your intro, it's about forming those partnerships and trying to figure out who's playing which role. But at the same time, the state has done a relatively poor job over the years. And I don't mean us sitting here in these chairs, but I'm talking about 30 years worth of decisions of sort of spinning off services that were state services or should by definition be state services out to the nonprofit sector, which is awesome because of the roots in the community, but then also cutting the financial lifeline to the nonprofits after we've transitioned the kids out into the community. So that's something we need to sort of come to grips with as a state.
Absolutely.
So the challenges, I think, for me, now I'm looking through my lens, right? As this new crop, there seems to be this growing crop of kids who are diagnosed, right? And we could talk for hours and hours about what that might be about and never really know. Right. Then there's this other group of young adults who are out in the world or are living with their parents and are at all different levels of capacity and trying to, in an adult environment with lots of individual choice, knit together a support network or a safety net for them. Is a challenge. So that's where the idea of state and community, nonprofit, and whatever else is out there really is the answer. But the kids who are adults I find that to be a real challenge. And some of it is because they are adults and need to make their own decisions, or can if they choose to. And we haven't, we're following this growth in this population like everyone else.
Sure.
So now these kids are in their 30s, they're not kids anymore. What can we do to support them? And I found it to be certain points of it's kind of weak, and in other areas really wonderful. What was out there for them, and then whether they choose to engage in it or not. Like there's a lot of activity around social supports, right, and peer stuff, and trying to build that social network for our kids who are adults. And we made a complete list of what was available for our older son, and he rejects it all. Now for him,
he's going to find his own way.
He's going to find his own way. He's a bit of a loner. I've asked him if he's happy, and he said he was satisfied. Which,
interesting.
And when I thought about it, I've been happy, but being satified is a whole different thing, right? And maybe we can learn from that.
Absolutely.
This is enough, for me. And chooses not to engage with other folks in a social setting who are on the spectrum. He feels a little marginalized, feels a little stereotyped, feels a little, The younger of the two, who, has, on paper, is someone who has got a degree, should be working in his field and all of that, and that comes with challenges as well. He desperately does not want to be identified as being on the spectrum.
Right.
He feels like it's a big old scarlet A, and he doesn't want that. But sometimes you have to sort of be willing to accept that if you want to engage in some of the supports that are there. So he's building his own set of friends who understand. Look, we love him to death. He's quirky as can be. He just is.
And that's who he's going to be.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
But you want to know about the best films of all time? You want to read his screenplay? You want to look at his art? You'll see that there is an amazing person here with an incredible inner life, and really desperate to communicate his vision of the world. And he's trying to develop the vehicles to do that. So
It's really
I'm
interesting.
really proud of both of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Clearly done an incredible job. Absolutely.
And they have too. Look, when I think back about who these kids were and their experience in foster care and their experiences that got them into foster care, plus the developmental issues that they face, I'm not sure I could get up in the morning and put my pants on every day if I had seen the things that they had
Challenges
seen.
they were. Mhm.
So, we did what we could based on our privilege, our access, our resources in the state, all of those things. But at the end of the day, they did far more because they were willing to engage. They
Right.
were
They
willing
made
to
their own way.
try.
Yep.
You know? So it's a pretty miraculous thing, and not to get all sort of
Right.
but,
No. Absolutely.
we did the paperwork. We did the sort of love and support piece.
Yeah.
They did the hard work.
The heavy lifting.
Yeah. Look, the younger of the two, was self-stim. He would sort of echolalic. He would make noises. He would, rock, and he would just, and sort of teaching him to calm himself was an amazing gift. And we didn't do that. We wouldn't know where to begin. My answer to that would be what my mother would have said to me, and that's stop it.
Cut it out.
Stop it, right? But no, they taught. I mean, they literally wrapped him up in a quilt. Rocked him on a swing, taught him how to sort of shut down the physical stuff
Wow.
to sort of quiet the inner self. And all through his adolescence, I could watch him almost like instinctively know that when things got a little overwhelming, a good quilt and a good wrap, maybe a little nap or some quiet time. I think it's true for all of them.
I'd say so.
Absolutely. So shifting a little bit to the sort of concrete, everyday stuff. One of the challenges, again, that we hear throughout the state is about housing. And you clearly have been able to set up a very innovative and seemingly very functional housing
days.
situation for your boys. Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
any young adult goes through those same challenges.
Right.
How did that idea come about?
Well, what we did was sort of think about what the transition for our older son from Chapel Haven into the community was going to look like. And it was clear by the end of his experience there that he had learned a ton, but he did not, under any circumstances, want to go out into an apartment with some of these same folks. And because he likes his quiet, he likes his space, he's routine oriented, he doesn't like disturbance of that. So we knew he was likely going to live alone, or maybe with one other person if we could find that ideal person. And then we started to, it was really a numbers game. We looked at rents, right? We looked at what it would cost to rent versus what it would cost to buy. And then where was he going to work? And so then when he found a job, and at that point he didn't drive, he was taking public transportation, we knew he needed to live in an environment with decent public transportation and to be able to get to work easily. And then drew a circle around that. We called it the walking circle. And started looking in those areas. Now we found a condo for him. And then sort of look, we're not people of means necessarily. It's not like he has a big trust.
Right.
It's not like we've put money aside and we can do all that. We're working middle class folks like most people. And he, on the other hand, had saved a little bit of money. So all that order, all that sort of also transferred into his stewardship of his own resources.
Outstanding.
So he had a little bit of pile of money he'd been saving in his room, which made me a little afraid when I realized that because I think I should have known. But he had enough money, and we were able to help a little bit, and he bought a condo close to work. And look, it's not the condo that you or I might pick, but it's adequate. And he's doing well there. And then when his brother came out of school, his brother came home to live with us for a little while, and it was very clear that, like most parents, on the spectrum, not on the spectrum, having another adult in the house is a little bit of a challenge. They get used to living away, they come back, rules and all of that. And so they calculated the plan to live together. And so they do. Now it's a transition for the younger of the two. It's not a permanent situation. But in my heart of hearts, I certainly hope that whatever he chooses, that they will be close enough physically to one another that they can be of help to each other. And they are. And so they're living together and sharing expenses and figuring out the world together and using us as a backstop when they need it. So that worked out for them. You know, I thought, because I was desperate to have them have more social connections to others outside of their immediate family, I wanted them to be in a house with roommates and to have, you know, someone to go to the movies with. But I think we realize now that they're going to be that for each other in one way or another going forward.
Absolutely. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Anything else, Commissioner? Did you have anything else you wanted
No,
to
it
ask?
sounds like they're making their own way with your support, and I'm sure they feel you're always there for them if they need that extra support.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. And you know, the question is, who will be that support when we're no longer here?
Correct.
You know, it's easy to sort of hire a lawyer, right, in perpetuity to be there, right? You know, but that doesn't feel right.
Right. It's not always lawyering they need.
No, it's right, and I would argue less lawyering sometimes is a good idea.
Exactly.
But you know, we have a third child who is younger, and he observed recently when the boys called to help decode a problem that they were facing, that he asked me who was going to do that when we were no longer here to do that, and said, I'll do it. And I think, as I said at Autism Awareness Day, I was simultaneously proud of him and sad for him, because you know, it's a thing, right? It's a thing that you're going to have to.
It's responsibility.
Thank you. A responsibility that he didn't choose.
Right.
I mean, we chose these children.
Right.
We knew what we were getting ourselves into, and it's been great. But he's sort of by birth in this family, and but the fact that he'd be willing to take it on and be there, it makes me very proud of him.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But the community resources and the state at the backstop, you know, that has to be. We have to sort of. They need to know at the end of the day that if I'm not here, here's the list. Right, from closest family kind of connections down through the police and the state. You know, who do you call so that you're not in an unsafe situation or things start to unravel in a life that's otherwise very well planned and pretty predictable.
What do you see as the next steps? Next steps for your family, for your boys? Where are you going to go from here?
You know, not quite sure. You know, at some point,
uncharted territory.
I got some time to work, but at some point I hope to retire, and I hope to spend part of the time somewhere warm. You know, I love Connecticut, so I don't know what that will mean for them. It's interesting watching, again, the younger of the two older ones sort of start to put a plan in place to save enough money to launch out on his own. They actually were over for dinner this weekend, and we were talking a little bit about what that might look like. And I'm, of course, on the financial side saying, you know, buy versus rent. And he's like, I'm not sure that I want the responsibility of that. And I might want to. So,
good call.
Yeah, and then I'm like, well, but it's a far better financial. And my spouse is like, you know, let him be.
Right.
Are you listening?
Right. Stop talking. So that'll be the next transition. And again, satisfied. I hope we're happy. And
that's an achievement, satisfied.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, not to sort of beat that particular topic, but it really is one that made me reflect. What parts of my life am I satisfied with?
Sure.
And I realized that list is not as long as I would like.
Right.
And so that's more about me than about what's out there.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, thank you again so much for coming here today. This has been fantastic, and I know that you're an inspiration to so many of our families. The commissioner spoke about Autism Awareness Day, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and I think that it was a fantastic service to the autism community in Connecticut.
Well, thank you. It's been great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Happy to be here.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thanks.
recorded at the Department of Developmental Services Production Studio in HD.